I've got Dr. Chris here, who I was going to just interview. I think I can keep on going. So I'm just going to have a quick word with Dr. Chris, who's a real doctor. When I met him before, I asked him that.
Where's your camera thing?
Yeah, there you go. He thought it was quite funny. So I'm just going to hold this towards you. So
Yes.
I already had COVID. So I'm just
Okay.
going to get the nice iconic.
Me too.
So I'm just going to ask you with a couple of words about, obviously you're a doctor, you did the action last week.
Yeah.
What the health emergency versus the climate emergency, how things,
Well, I think the issue is that human health and environmental health, and they well, we depend on it. Anyone who's ever tried to grow a plant will know that it needs a certain degree of uniformity of, you have to water it, you have to make sure it's not too hot, too cold. I guess my major concerns health-wise are directly as a result of my concerns about the environment. If you haven't got a stable environment, you haven't got the basis for which to have health or even a stable society. If your food supply drops, you're in big trouble. I mean, we know from the genocides in Rwanda, as soon as the calorie intake, there were lots of pockets of huge amounts of violence in Rwanda a few decades ago, and we know that those pockets of violence were far greatest in the areas where the calorie intake was below, I think it was 1,100 calories. There was some research done by the ex-interior minister of Rwanda called James Gasana, and like you have to look at Syria, and we know that a series of climate extremes that were kind of unforeseen. They led to people having to leave their houses, leave their homes, because they couldn't afford, they couldn't grow any food. So they had to move to the cities. That destabilized the population. It led to conflict. So my biggest concern health-wise is probably around food, availability of food, and the conflict that results, and people have to leave. Obviously, there were lots of other ones, the direct results of extreme weather, disease migration, and we know that there's lots of tropical diseases that don't exist here, but they're going to exist here at some point over the next few generations. It's been predicted from the government that malaria is going to be moving into the south coast. I believe it was the latter half of the century that we'll start to see cases. Dengue fever's moving, and the Lyme disease is moving. There are all sorts of things that we're going to have to deal with that we haven't had to deal with before, and it's destabilizing. Not to mention the mental health, not to mention that we have, according to government's own reports, a tripling of heat deaths, I believe, by 2050, and that's going to be increasing more to something like 9 or 10 times the amount of heat death in the UK by the end of the century. And there's a whole host of horrific things, and then pandemics. So if you get a pandemic on top of huge amounts of climate migration, which destabilizes a society, on top of food insecurity, we're going to have multiple crises at the same time, and we've got a government that can barely, solve one. So it has to prevent. Like, the most important thing is that we prevent this. It's going to be horrible, but we have the power to do it, and that's why we're here on the streets. That's why something like the CEE bill is going to be so vital to take away the short-termist obsession of governments and think long-term. I'm a GP. I deal with people who have high blood pressure and diabetes. These are long-term conditions that you have to deal with now in order to reduce the problems later, the complications. If you don't treat it now, people end up having heart attacks and strokes in their 40s and 50s if you don't deal with it from a young person. And we have to think of the planet in that regard. So it has a long-term health condition, and we have to tackle it at the beginning and not when they end up having huge amounts of complications. So that's why we're here. And I hope you can come and join us, because the only way that governments change is if there's sustained public pressure. That's the only way. We've tried everything else. We've tried letters. Did you know 40 million? So a letter was signed on behalf of 40 million health professionals only a matter of months ago. It was called the Healthy Recovery Letter, and it was reported on all over the medical press. And that was asking for the government to, asking for Simon Stevens or another representative from health to essentially sit in the economic meetings to decide how we should recover from coronavirus, keeping health and the environment at the forefront. Did we hear anything back from the government? No. That's why we're here, because they don't listen when you try to warn them normally. So Yeah.
Just going to make sure, just a quick, make sure everything's okay with Director Val's. But what you're saying is like it's
Do
you know
something.
this is the climate and ecological emergency is it's a health emergency. You know,
Absolutely.
it's at the forefront of the problem. It's we shouldn't be just looking at it like just kind of like property damage or damage to wealth.
No, I mean, absolutely not. That's why there's over 1,000 doctors and nurses who've joined Extinction Rebellion, and there are many more writing to us each day saying, "Thank you. I really want to get involved."
It's 1,000,
Over 1,000.
over 1,000 doctors and nurses.
I can tell you now that it's starting up in other countries too: Australia, Spain, Switzerland, America. Only the other day, I spoke to an Argentinian doctor who says we absolutely need this over here too, because it's going to be an international effort.
Yeah.
Like no one country can go it alone. But what you find is when people say, "Oh, how about China? How about this country?" What you find is that these things spread. Good ideas spread. And so, although it may have started here, it's not going to end here. It's going to spread around the world eventually, and we hope it spreads around the world before we have the complications and not afterwards.